Well, to help us understand what the situation means for the region at large, I earlier spoke to Nathaniel Powell, West Africa analyst at Oxford Analytica.
Several ways it could go. If the military continues to pursue the strategy that Bazoum was pursuing before, which is a relatively holistic counterinsurgency strategy that was comparatively successful compared to Niger's neighbors, Burkina Faso and Mali, then and if at the same time they pursue a transition, a relatively swift political transition back to elected civilian rule, it's possible that their international partners will continue their support and maybe nothing changes, particularly in a negative direction. What's perhaps more likely, though, if the military is in control, we might see a more hands-off counterinsurgency strategy, which means more violence, potentially against civilians, which can only benefit jihadist groups. And even if that doesn't happen, the mere fact of insecurity and instability in the capital and uncertainty around Niger's foreign relations, whether it's with Western partners or regionally, will probably divert some of the military and government's attention away from the struggle against insecurity.
Well, now, we've always seen Niger as one of the last bastions of Western support in the Sahel region. And we saw in the coup demonstrations in support of the coup earlier today, many Russian flags being flown. What does that say about the possible infiltration of Wagner power, the Russian Wagner group, in basically taking over and filling up that vacuum?
Well, it's highly unlikely that Wagner would just appear out of nowhere. Wagner only appears in countries where it's invited in. It's also, there's absolutely no evidence that the coup was directed by or anything to do with Russia or any connection with Russia. None of the coup plotters seem to have any connections to Russia or Russians or the Wagner group. The reasons behind the coup are particular to Niger and to the situation in which the Nigerian government and particularly Mohamed Bazoum was facing, and the long history of military tensions, both within the military and between the military and civilian authorities, that go back generations in Niger. So I would say that the likelihood that the Wagner group shows up and turns Niger into a sort of Mali requires a number of intermediary steps, and it won't happen overnight. And if it does, it will be because certain elements within the military see it as in their political interest, not because of Russian pressure.
And now let's talk about those possible mediating powers, the likes of ECOWAS, the West African regional group. They say they want the situation to resolve itself by reinstating the president into his position, but you know, if we compare it to other situations like in Mali, Burkina Faso, what power do they really have to affect change?
Well, that's the tragedy of ECOWAS is that its power is quite limited, especially when it comes to coercive power. It did impose sanctions on Mali for 6 months, very heavy sanctions, but it didn't really manage to change the trajectory of the regime. So it's unclear whether they won't overnight impose those kind of sanctions over Niger. They'll try to negotiate with whatever junta is in place, and over time, what will probably happen is that there'll be some kind of face-saving arrangement between ECOWAS and the junta over an agreed-upon transitional period. But ECOWAS's overall influence will unfortunately be relatively limited. Even with Bola Tinubu at the head of ECOWAS at the moment, he's trying to exert a more, he's the Nigerian president, trying to exert a more assertive role for both Nigeria and ECOWAS against coups. They don't seem to have the capability to reverse this or to impact this in a really significant way.